Hi there once again, and welcome to another Expresso mechanic tutorial. And in this one we're going to be building one of these, which is of course an analog clock. Now, a few weeks ago you may remember that I did a Python Bytes episode in which I introduced you to date time. Anyway, Simon Trick Filmer was asking if that could be turned into an analog clock. Well, I'm not using date time to produce this, but I am going to be using a combination of both Expresso and Python in order to achieve this, and as you will see, it will produce a very, very accurate analog clock. But anyway, that's what we're going to be about in this tutorial, so without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. We'll start by bringing in a cylinder, and we'll orientate this plus X. And its radius needs to be 110, its height 5. The height segments we can make 1 because we don't need any more than that. We'll make the rotation segments 60. That should be fine for what we've got. And our caps, we can put a fillet on it, 3 segments, and we'll make it 0.5. And that should do nicely with just 1 segment there. That's okay for the caps. So we've got the clock face, we'll call that face, and that's all looking very nice. Moving on from here, we need to create the hour and minute markers that go around the edge of the face. So that will be our next port of call. I'll bring in 2 cubes. This one can be set to 1, 10 in the height, and 3 in the Z. And this one, 1 in the X, 5 in the height for the Y, and 1 for the Z. And that's as much as we need to do with those. If we just get a hold of them, I'll just shift select that one and just bring them forward to here, and then just separate them out, we can see what they are. So these are obviously going to be our hours, so we'll call these, or this one hour and this one minute. Now I'm going to make 3 copies of this one, and then select or shift select to select all of them if I can. So let's drag a marquee, it might be easier. I can drag a marquee over those just to select them all, and then hold down my command and option keys and drop them into a cloner. Now the cloner needs to be radial, it needs to be ZY, the count needs to be 60 and 100 in the radius, and that completes our markers, and we can then push these back to where they need to be, just about in there. Let's have a look, see where we are. We're a little bit off kilter, so our cloner is not quite centered. We need to make it on the Z0. That's fine, and other than that we're pretty good. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfectly touching, but we can get it somewhere near, somewhere about there. I think that will be okay. Ooh, don't want to do that. Somewhere about there. That's fine. So we've got our clock face. What we'll do, if we select our cloner, we can just go into the transform here and make these yellow so that they stand out a little bit more. And that's all looking very nice. The clock face will make just a blue, basic blue material, I think, for that. Let's have a look, see where we are. Just go down here and give it something like that. That's good. Everything stands out nicely now, and we can see what we're about. So that's great. That's our clock face well and truly on the way. We can think about making the hands next, and that's going to be our next port of call. Before I go for the hands, I'm just going to make the capstan that goes in the middle of the clock face. Again, we'll set this to plus X, and it needs to be 1, 5, and the rest can stay the same. And all we've got to do then is, again, we'll make it a yellow sort of colour. Just go into here and just pull that down somewhere there. That'll do nicely for that. So that's a centre capstan. Let's see where we'll drop that into the face actually for what it is. Just call it capstan. And that can be moved if I go into my top view, so F2, just get a little bit closer. That's it. Just want to pull that forward so it's just somewhere there, and that's fine. That will accommodate our hands when we bring those in, and that will be our next step. We'll bring in another cube and we'll make this second for second hand. It needs to be 1, by 120 by 2. If we bring that forward, we can see that we've got the hand there. The next thing to do is to bring it up to somewhere around the center point, which is about there. Let's just go into our right hand view, so F3, H to see everything, and we can see that the hand is in place and it's about where it needs to be. It just needs to be level more or less with the top of the hour marker there. That will do fine, and then we can make this editable and then work with the axis. Just bring this down. Let's go into that right hand view again and just zoom in a little bit. And again, I'm going to do this by eye. It's not that crucial. We'll just bring it down to somewhere there. Okay, that should be okay for that. It just sits there on the capstan. If we then come out of our axis tool and just move this slightly back until it's just about in position, that should be okay. It's just, yeah, just got the capstan running through it. If we just go a little bit further forward, just so that we can see the capstan, the tip of the capstan, that's all we need to see. And I think that will do nicely. I mean, you can make the hand a little bit wider if you wish to. I mean, I'm only doing very basic hands here. If you want to do ornate hands with arrows at the tips and things like that, please feel free to model those, but I'm not going to do that for this tutorial. There's just no need. Just hit F1 just to bring us back to where we were. Okay, so that's looking good. The second hand I will make red. So let's just go into automatic and just choose a red colour, sort of darkish red somewhere down there. That will do nicely. And that gives us our second hand, and that's looking great. We'll hold down the option key and we'll select this first, hold down the option key and select a null object, and this can be called second hand. And there is a good reason why I'm doing this, which you will see a little bit later. Great, so that's our second hand dealt with. We can now think about the minute and hour hands. So for our minute hand, we'll grab a hold of another cube. We'll make this again 1 centimetre, 105 in the Y and 3 in the Z. Again, we'll bring it forward so that we can see where it is. It just needs to, if I go into my front view, so F4, just zoom in a little bit so that we can see where this is. If I move that so that it's just behind my second hand, a little bit of gap, nothing too major, and let's see where we are now. Right, again, we need to bring this, oops, we need to move it up in its along its y-axis. We bring it somewhere about here, say. That should be okay. Let's have a quick look and see where we are. It just wants to be close to the top, just below the top, and just below the, or just below the bottom edge of the capstan. That looks okay. That looks as if that will work. So that's great. So we can make that editable. And once again, working with our axis tool, go into our right hand view. So F3, zoom out a little bit so that we can see where we are. Bring this down and then go a little closer. Get this somewhere around the center, which is there. That'll do nicely. And once again, we can rename this, or we'll call this 1 minute. And as I did before, I'm just going to come out of my axis tool, go back into model mode. Just don't switch off that axis tool. Okay, hold down my option key, select another null, and call this minute hand. Great, so that's done. Drop that beneath there. And then lastly, we can think about the hour hand. So it's to repeat the process, get another cube. This needs to be 185 and finally 3. We can bring it forward, see where it is. There's our hand, and we'll position it. Let's go into our front view. We'll position it just behind our minute hand. That should be fine for that. And then we can think about positioning this one. So we'll drag it upwards and again just position it in more or less the same position beneath the capstan as the minute hand. That will be fine as long as it's just about in the same place, which is about there. That's great. Make it editable. and once again reach for our axis tool, F3, zoom out a little bit, and then repeat the process of dragging this down, zooming in and getting it just about centered, which is about there. That should be fine. I mean, it's 0.008. We can make it 0 for what it is. That's fine. That should work perfectly well for us, and that's great. So that's all done. Once again, hold down my Option key, place it into a null, our hand, and we've got all the hands complete, and that's great. So that's our build. We've got our clock face done. Moving on from here, we can think about creating our first Expresso expression, and that's what we're going to do next. Before we reach for the Expresso, the first thing we need to do is set up some user data, and we'll call this clock set. So that's our null, and you've probably guessed that I'm going to be making it possible to set the clock. That's what we're going to be doing. What we need to do is add some user data. We'll call this hours stroke minutes. It will be a float and a float slider, a real value. A step of 1 is fine because it's seconds, so that's, or rather minutes I should say, that's fine. We'll limit it certainly, and we'll say 0 to 720, because that's a number of degrees the minute hand needs to go through to actually go through each hour. So when you think about it, the minute hand's got to go through 60, so 60 times 12 is 720. So that's all set up for us and looking good. We'll leave the default value at 0. Moving on from here, we can add a group actually, and I will pull that group away from the user data as I usually do, and I will just call this, let's see, what will I call it? Let's rename it, call it set clock. That's fine, and that's ready to go. And then all I need to do next is grab a hold of some more user data. This will be a separator, and I will want a separator line. Add some more user data, and this will be basically called set, and it will be a bool. So we'll set that up, and we'll, for the data type, we'll leave it as it is. It just needs to be a checkbox, so that's fine, and we can say OK. And we've got hours settings, so we've got set clock, we've got hours minutes, which is ready to go, and we've got set. The only thing I don't like is that word data there, so let's manage our user data in a separator here. Just take away the name, and we can OK that, and that's fine. We've just got a separator line now. Right, great. So that's our user data set up, and we can now think about the all-important first Expresso expression. We'll put the tag on clock set, so let's get a programming Expresso tag. We've got the editor open and we're ready to start work. We'll bring in clock set because that's where our user data is, and we need that first. So we need the hours and minutes, and we also need set. Just command click to make that bigger. Okay, great. So that's ready to go. Moving on from here, we need 2 range mappers. So we'll bring in one of those and then command drag, oops, don't want to do that, command drag to copy, and we can plumb our hours and minutes into the inputs of both range mappers, and then we can think about setting these up. Now our input range does want to be user defined, our output range must be degree, and that will apply to both of them, so we might as well just do that. In our top range mapper here, we need an input lower value of 0, an input upper value of 60. Output lower can be 0, and this can be minus 30. And that's that set up. That's fine. We don't need to do any more. In our second range mapper, we want a similar story, but this time we want 60, and in the lower value here, we want minus 360. They're the only changes. So 0 to 60, 0 degrees to minus 360. The next port of call, we need 2 conditions. So once again, I'll bring one of those in, command drag to copy, and set is going to be used to switch these. Okay. and our range mappers are going to be plumbed into our input 3s. The input 2s on both of these can be 0. That's important. That's what they need to be. The final step is to bring in the minute and hour hands. So we'll bring the hour in. This needs to be connected to the condition at the top. So we'll plumb this into here, and we need coordinates. It will be transform rotation, rotation P. And exactly the same with the minute hand. So we'll bring that one in. Transform, rotation, rotation P. Great. And that's as much as we need to do to actually create the first Expresso expression. And now let's see what happens. So if we select our clock set, we've got set unchecked at the moment, and if we uncheck that, nothing is going to happen to our clock. We can move this, nothing is going to happen. But with it set, we can move this and we can set the hands, so we can decide what we want to do. We can set it to whatever time we wish. So if it's going to be 8 minutes past 3, that's absolutely fine. It's set up. The minute hand is set to the correct minute, and the hour is set up correctly. Now the second hand I haven't included in this. If you wanted to, you could drive this by hours. You could say this was hours, minutes and seconds, and you could use the seconds to drive all of this, but you will have to make some changes to the numbers in order to get it to do what you want it to. You know, you'll have to work out a different formula if you're going to do that. But personally, I think if you start the seconds from 12 o'clock, you're going to get the most accurate setup for it anyway. If you just time it with your watch or whatever, so that once you hit 12, you can just set the thing in motion when we've got it all animating, and it should be really accurate. So I think that the hours and the minute hands are the ones to go for, and just leave the seconds so that you can start that from 12. But as I say, it's entirely up to you. If you want to play around with it and set up a mathematical formula to drive all the hands correctly, you can do that. Maybe that's a challenge for you. But anyway, that's our clock settings done. That's clock set all worked out. And of course, if we uncheck, we just go back to 12 o'clock. It starts from there. So that's what that's used for. You can either set the time yourself, or if you uncheck it, it just starts from 12 o'clock. Okay, fantastic. So that's all working nicely. And now we can think about making this clock actually work. I'll just group everything into a null. So Option G to group, and call this clock. Great. And we can add the Expresso tag. And we're ready to start. Let's see where we go from here. The first thing I'm going to do is bring in the second, minute and hour hand nulls. That's essential. We worked with these first, and that was fine for the setting, but we need the nulls now, so we'll bring those in. Second hand, minute and hour. Command click just to make them bigger, so that we can see what we're doing. Great, so we've got those in, and we need their rotation P. So transform rotation, rotation P, and we just need that for all of them. Get those in. Just make that slightly bigger. Okay, great, so they're set up. The next thing to do will be to get 3 degree nodes, because as I so often say, I like to work with degrees. So we'll just copy these down, and they are ready to go. So we'll just plumb in our hand nodes. Like that. The next thing we need will be 3 modulos. So we'll bring in a math node and change its function to modulo, and then command click to copy. And the outputs of our degrees can be plumbed in to here. And we can select all of these, and our modulo value needs to be 360. Because obviously our hands are going to travel through 360 degrees, and then they need to go back to 0 and start the process again. So that's why we're doing that with the modulo. Okay, great. So we've got those set up. and we've got it all working so far. The next thing to do is bring in a time node, because we will be requiring one of these. As per usual, remove the time port and add a frame port. Place it here. The next thing to do is to bring in the all-important node, and this is going to be the Python node. This is going to be the CPU. In actual fact, we can probably describe what we're actually going to be doing here as Python-controlled Expresso. Now, let's get this set up. We'll take out these two ports. We could leave them there, but I'll start from scratch, I think. We do need a frame port, so that will be an integer. We'll rename it frame. And then we need rotation P's for each one of these. So we can say that these, of course, will be float values. So I'll bring in 3 floats and we can rename them. And they will be renamed, if I can just check my notes. Yeah, okay, that's fine. I know what I'm going to do. So just rename this srot p, mrot p, and finally hrot p. So that's our inputs dealt with, and now we can think about our outputs. Now these, we can once again, well, this is a real value. If we just check this, we just say the port information, we can see it's a real value, so that's fine. We can add 2 more floats, and we can then rename the ports, and this will be current srot p. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but it makes sense. Current mrot p, and finally current hrot p. And that's as much as we need for our Python node with regard to its input and outputs. We'll switch to a scripting layout, select it once more and open in editor. So that's all fine. The first thing we can do actually is put the inputs in, so we can connect the frame to the frame, and then the modulos can be connected in sequence like so. And that gives us the first part of our Python node set up. Moving on from here, we can take away this line because we don't need it, and we can start thinking about global variables. So at the moment we've only got global current srot p, so this output is taken care of but nothing else is. So let's add some more. We can say current mrot p, current hrot p, so that takes care of all of the outputs, and we can then add a few more globals here. So we want sec trigger, and you'll see what these mean a little bit later. Sec rotation, sec start time, and then I simply want min rotation and finally our rotation. Okay, and that's all the global variables taken care of. We don't need any more of those. We can, if we so wish, add a spline function here because we are going to be using range mappers. I don't think it's necessary, so I'm not going to bother with it on this occasion, but if you wish to add one and put it in the range mapper, you can do. but as I say, I don't think it's really necessary, so I'm not going to do it. Right, so let's have a look and see where we can go from here. So first thing we need to say is if frame, so we're referring to what's coming into the input port here, if frame is equal to 0, and then we need to set things up, we need to initialize everything. So we can say our rotation is equal to an empty list, min rotation, again equal to an empty list, sec rotation, can you guess what it's going to be? Yeah, same thing again, sec trigger, once again, and finally sec start time is equal to an empty list. And that's our setup done. We don't need to worry about anything else. That's fine. So at the beginning of the animation, we're going to set all of these up with empty lists. The next thing we need to look at is triggering our second hand and how we're going to be making that work. Well, in fact, we're going to be looking at all the hands, but the actual the crux of it is actually the second hand. That's going to be driving everything. So in order to do this, we'll say if frame modulo 30 is equal to 0. So in other words, every second we want to check the status of our hands and make them move. That's what we're going to be doing. We can then say if len our rotation is less than 1, our rotation dot append, and it will be open brackets h rot p. Oops, that's not quite correct, is it? H rot p. So every 30 frames, we want to take what's coming out of this modulo for the hours, because we can see this, or rather this, I beg your pardon, the second hand is this one, the hours. So we want this rotation value. That needs to be placed into our hour rotation list every second. We need to do the same again with the minutes, so we'll copy what we've got here, paste it in here, and change the hour to min rotation. Once again, min rotation and m rot p. Same with the seconds, so again we'll paste this line in, change this to sec rotation and s rotation p to be added to the list. The next thing we can work with will be the sec trigger. So we can say if len sec trigger is less than 1, sec trigger dot append, and it will be 1. And finally in this section we can say if len sec start time is less than 1, sec start time dot append, and this time it will be frame. So that's got everything checked and everything will be set up as need be. In our next section we can think about our range mappers, because there's going to be 3 of them, one for the second, minute and our hands respectively. So we can say if len sec trigger, and this time it will be equal to 1. So in other words, if this has got something appended to it, if there's anything in there, then the sec trigger is primed and ready to go. We can then say duration is equal to and it will be frame minus sec start time square brackets 0. And that will allow us, as I've said many times before, to start from wherever we happen to be on the timeline. We'll be effectively zeroing that out, and we'll be starting from that point. And this is to run, and will of course trigger and run, our monoflops as we do with an Expresso, and drive our range mappers. It's the same thing. This is effectively the start time for a monoflop that we're creating here. So we can then say if duration is less than 15, so if it's less than half a second, what I'm going to actually be creating here is a ticking sort of a second. So the hand will move over half a second, then it will pause for half a second, it will move, pause for half a second, so we'll get tick, 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 that kind of effect. And in fact, of course, you could use the sound node to add ticking if you wished, but we won't worry about that. So we've got our duration set up, and we're saying if duration is less than 15. We can now say sec range mapper is equal to, and it will be c4d.utils dot range map brackets, and it will be duration 0, comma, and it will be 14. So we're going to be one less than 15. That's important because things won't work properly if we don't do that. And it will be 0, comma, minus 6. So every second we're going to be moving over 6 degrees, or minus 6 degrees in this case. So that's important. So that's what we're going to be doing there. And then it will be comma false, because as I said, I'm not going to add the spline, and that's as much as we need to do in there. False because we're going in a minus direction. If we were going in a positive direction, we could put true in there. Okay, so that's done. We can then say s underscore current rot s is equal to, and it will be sec rotation square bracket 0. So whatever we've put into this here, and that will have been taken from the current rotation, of course, you know, or the s rot p, that will be in there. So that would be the current status, let's say the current rotation status of the second hand, and initially it will be 0 because that's where we always start from. So that's important. So that's sec rotation 0, and it will be plus sec underscore range mapper. So that's what we're going to be doing, and that will enable the range mapper to actually move the second hand over 15 frames by 6 or minus 6 degrees. That's how that's going to work. We now need to repeat this process with the minute hand. So we'll copy both these lines, paste them in here, and just set things up accordingly. So min, and nothing needs to be changed there except the minus 6, and that needs to be 0.1. And if we get the calculator out, we can just take a quick look at what's going on here. So when we think about it, this second hand is going to travel through 360 degrees or 60 seconds before the minute hand moves to 1 minute. So that's going to, so there's, in other words, that the minute hand has got to move over 6 degrees or minus 6 degrees in the time it takes the second hand to rotate through 360 degrees. And the formula for that is quite simple. What we need to do is say 6 divided by 60, and that gives us the 0.1. So that's how we've worked that out. Okay then, so we can move on from here. Once again, paste our 2 lines in, and we've got this time to change the sec to hour. So our range mapper, we've also got to change our figure in here. We'll do that in just a second, but we'll set things up first. Let's see where we are here. So we've got to do some more work. So we've got minute before we do this, current rotation M, and again min range mappers. Just get that done first, otherwise it will get forgotten. That's got to be min as well. Okay, so they're all set up. Everything should be okay there, and we just got to do the hours. So again, H rotation. It should actually be, what have I got? Rotation S there. It should be rotation P. Rotation P, not rotation S. They're all slightly wrong. Let's just get that right. Okay, so they're all set up like the way they should be set up. Let's just get the hour rotation in there and hour rotation in there. Okay, that should all be working as it should. Yeah, everything's okay. Right, so that's this section of code dealt with, apart from this number here. And this number here needs to be 0.0083. Now, how do we work that out? Well, again, if we look at the calculator, we can see what we're going to do here. We know that the hour hand has got to move to here over the space, obviously, of 1 hour. And that's 30 degrees. So we can say 30, and we know that 60 seconds, we get what? We get a minute for every 60 seconds. So if we times 60 by 60, we'll just cancel that for a minute. 60 times 60. So that's the minutes times by the seconds, or the seconds times by the minutes, depending on which way you like to look at it, which gives us the 3,600. So if we say 30 divided by 3,600, we get 0.0083 recurring. So that's where I got that number from. And that moves the hour hand over 1/120th of a degree for every second that ticks. So that's what that is. That's what it equates to. Okay, so that's that little section of code dealt with. We now need to say, at the level of the if duration here, we need to put an else condition in there. So else, and it will be hour rotation dot clear min rotation dot clear, and I'll just copy this from now on. See, that's not spelt correctly. Rotation, that's better. And that can be sec rotation dot clear sec trigger dot clear and sec start time dot clear. Okay, fabulous. So we've got those in, and then finally we can put another else condition here. So when we're not at 1 second and we're not triggering our monoflop, we can say h underscore current rot p is equal to, and it will simply be h underscore rot p. We'll copy this line, paste it here, change the h for an m, and that's dealt with the minutes. And finally we deal with the seconds, and that will hold the hands at their current positions while we're waiting for the next second to elapse. Okay, and that is the code. That's as much code as we actually need. Obviously at the moment it won't do anything. I mean, if we try to do anything, nothing happens because we've got nothing connected to the outputs. That's the next part that we need to do. So let's return to the Expresso editor and see what we need to do here. For a start, we need 3 degree nodes, so let's bring those in. and this time they need to be degree to radians in their function. Command drag to copy those, and we can plumb the outputs from our Python node into their inputs. Great, so that's the first little part dealt with. And you can see it's looking like a CPU, can't you, with its legs? I said it would function like that. So let's see what we can do. With the next part, we need a condition node, or rather a compare node first. I need one of those. It can be equal to 0. That's what we need it to be because we're going to be checking the frames when we're at the start of the animation. That's what we're interested in there. And now we need 3 conditions. So we'll bring those in, copy them down. And the compare is going to be the controller of the switches. So we'll plumb those in like this. And that's ready to go. Now, when we're at the start of the animation, this will be switched to using input 3, so we'll leave input 3 at 0. The input 2s we can plumb the outputs of our degree nodes into, so we'll put those like that, and they're ready to go. And then we can set up the final part of this, and that's just to bring in the second hand, minute hand, and hour hand nulls once again, and at the input stages give them rotation P. We'll do that with all 3 of those. Command click just to make them bigger so that we can see what's going on, and then we just need to connect these accordingly. Okay, if we hit H, we can see the whole expression, and that's as big as it gets. Okay, so that's our expression set up. We don't need to do any more with this, and now we can test the thing and see if it's going to work. Right, let's just run the sequence and see if anything happens. Right, well, I'm not getting any. All right, I've got a yellow top, so just get this out of the way for a second. Let's have a look. Right, saying it can't find values. Let's just see if there's anything here that's obvious. Let's have a look at the range mappers. Oh, untils. Utils is good, not untils. Just take that away. Yeah, it's in all of them because I copied them. Right, let's have a go. Let's go back. See what happens now. Right, saying sec trigger is not defined. Well, I don't trust that. I think there's something else going wrong because obviously I did sec trigger is defined up here. We've got, let's have a look. Sec trigger is in there. It's there. Where are we? Sec trigger if less than 1, sec trigger append 1. It's there. No, that's a nonsense. There's clearly nothing going on there. There's something else that it doesn't like. Let's just have a quick look up the top. So current S rotation, current M. Let's have a quick look. See if, I see it. Look, I've defined these incorrectly. So that should be current S underscore. Yeah, current M underscore and current H underscore. That sets those up correctly, and down here the same thing. Let's just remove that. H underscore M underscore and S underscore. That lines all of those. Is there anything else I can see? Yes, I've got -6 here. This should be -0.1 and this should be -0.0083. Otherwise those two hands will move in the wrong direction. Okay, I think we might be all right. Let's just clear this. Still saying sec trigger is not defined. Let's have a look. I'll tell you what, let's do my old trick. Let's get a result node. Let's plumb that into there. Go back to 0 and everything is okay at the moment. And let's see if this works. Let's just clear that out and let's see if this works. And yep, it looks as if it does. Let's go into our right hand view and have a quick look at what's happening with the hands. If we just run this, yep, we can see the minute hand is subtly moving, and I think we should see that the hour hand is doing the same. Yeah, the hour hand is moving. Of course it's going to be by tiny fractions, but you can see that it definitely is moving. So yes, that's sorted out the bugs and it's now working correctly. The only thing that's weird is this here. I don't understand why this is necessary. If you take it away, go back to 0 and play, does it work? Yes, it does. But let's play around with clock set and see what happens there. So if I go into my clock set here, we'll just set this to somewhere and just click there. So we've got it at 2 minutes to 3, okay? Let's run this. And now you can see that there's something weird happening. Something very strange is going on there that shouldn't be going on. It's all right now, but there's a weird sort of anomaly that creeps in. I don't know why that is. That's interesting, but the thing that you can do in order to stop that happening is reconnect this, and you'll find that you just won't get it. It's bizarre. I don't understand why that happens, but that can correct it completely. It's just set the clock again. So we go to turn this off and we run the sequence now. We're fine. Let's just set the clock to something else. So we're 20 past 5. Let's run that, and that's perfectly good. But yeah, if you take that result node away, you'll find that it does do some strange things. It's weird. Just one of those weird anomalies that seems to creep in with Expresso and Python every now and again that I seem to be getting. I don't know whether there is a bug in Cinema somewhere that they simply haven't found, but it is weird that you sometimes need to use result nodes to put a result node in there just to sort things out when they go a bit awry. It's certainly quite a consistent problem with anything that uses monoflops, in particular the Expresso monoflop node. Not necessarily the Python code that I've just done there, but it's certainly a consistent problem that I just keep on getting when using monoflops. You know, that it seems to often be a case that you need to use a result node to sort things out. Really weird. But anyway, there you go. It's all working. So that is how you go about creating a clock using a combination of Expresso and Python. And I mean, the code, not particularly complicated code, is it really? A few global variables that need to be set up, a check of the status of the hands are on every 30th frame. So every second we're checking the status of the hands, grabbing a hold of their current rotations, setting a trigger, setting a start time, using a monoflop and a range mapper setup, 3 range mappers as it happens, 1 for each hand, and then moving the hands. And then at all other times, we're making sure that the hands are stationary in their current positions. That's all we're doing there, really, with that code. And then we've got an expression here that will allow us to set the clock, just using the hours, minutes, and we can choose whether or not we use this setting or we start from 12 o'clock. That's what we're doing there. And then in this one, everything else is there. So we just get, as I say, the current rotation of our hands. We check to see if they've rotated through 360. If they have, then we set them back to 0. That's what's going to happen there. So the modulos are doing that. Feed everything into the Python and it does its job and then outputs the necessary rotation values to the hands. That's all we're doing there. And then here we just check to see if we're at the beginning of the animation, and if we are, we 0 everything out. That's as much as we're doing. So it's not a particularly complex setup at all in order to make this work. But do bear in mind that there are some strange things that can go on, and you might need a result node in there just to sort things out. And that just about brings this tutorial to a close. So as always, I really hope you've learned some new techniques here that you can perhaps apply to your own projects. And if you have enjoyed the tutorial, then please give it a like. And of course, if you haven't already, then please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment and ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, as always, please do share this video, because all this good stuff really does help keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that about calls time on this one. Yeah, pun intended. So I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.